Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. This video is about Michael Lockwood. If you remember, I did a video the other day regarding his sudden and strange resignation. It's come to light, and I have got another video about this, that he's resigned apparently because of historical allegations of statutory R of a 14-year-old girl when he was in his 20s, so 40 odd years ago. That seems very convenient. I did in the earlier video say that there was a lot of strangeness about his resignation. It didn't sit right. There was something weird about the whole setup. After that video, I received information. I had a contact. Not a contact that I'd ever used before. It was a complete sort of stranger off the street knocking on the door kind of thing, figuratively, not literally. And he provided me with a lot of information. A lot of it was weird. A lot of it was so unbelievable. But then I started looking at what he was giving me, and I started to think that there was maybe something in it. And I needed to sort of do some checking. Now, my contact is someone who I've asked questions. He's answered these questions. And I'm not going to identify him, obviously, for obvious reasons. And I'm not going to give any indication of how he comes to know these things particularly. I need to protect him. He talks about another person and the events of that person's professional life and beyond. And so I'm going to take you on a little journey with someone who is not Michael Lockwood. We are going to do a story about events in the past that have happened to someone and how it's tied up with the intelligence services, how there seems to be some very strange coincidences or strange happenings and events. Then we're going to look at what's happened, and then we're going to just sort of introduce then why this relates to Michael Lockwood, amongst many others. It's a very, very strange tale. So this video will be very different from my normal ones. Normally I come in, I do an introduction like this. I then sort of cut down into the story. I put myself in the corner, we discuss the story, go through the piece. I come up, do a conclusion, and I'm out. This is very different. So I'm going to do it in a kind of chapter format and take you through sort of one step at a time and hopefully do it in a logical order so that you can follow the trail. See what's happening, understand the past history of what's happened, and then we can then relate that and start tying that on to what's happening now. And it is a very strange and curious tale. And when he told me, my source, I was at first, as I say, very disbelieving. But then with the sort of things he was providing, certainly a lot of which I cannot release yet, not until I get a second source on a lot of it. Some of it is names. I like my house, I want to keep it. I'm not opening myself up for libel cases or any kind of prosecution, so I will be very, very circumspect in how I describe a lot of things, and where I absolutely positively must name a name, I will ensure that that name is in no way directly accused of anything. I cannot have that. So bear with me when you follow this through, and I think you'll be quite intrigued. If you stick with this, it's quite intriguing. It's a bit of a tale, and it goes to show what's happening for a long time in this country, I think, and how it relates to Michael Lockwood. So we will start now, and we will go in, and we will do chapter 1, the beginning. Our story begins with a young man by the name of Melvin Hodgson. Melvin was born in 1961 But our story really starts to take shape at the end of the 70s, just after the Thatcher government took office in May 1979, 4th of May, strangely enough, Star Wars Day. It was a new hope, quite literally, after the years of the socialist government, the winter of discontent, England basically being a cesspool because of all the strikes. So Thatcher took over. She installed her new government, and her first Home Secretary was a man called Leon Britton. Britton was a career politician, an intelligent man, knew an awful lot. As Home Secretaries go, I suppose he was perfectly adequate. No, certainly not the worst. But he was a married man with children, but he had a proclivity in an era where you kept this thing quiet. He was, if not outright gay, at least bisexual. Because, as I say, he was married, but he did enjoy relationships with young men. Perfectly legal relationships. And one of the young men who he allegedly had a relationship with was our friend Melvin Hodgson. And that is how Melvin Hodgson became sort of known to the security forces, the MI5, MI6, GCHQ, or our security forces. So for the protection of politicians and things, of course, it would be MI5, the intelligence agency. And of course, they do keep tabs on all the politicians, especially cabinet ministers, for their own protection. And so this guy sort of came in under the radar, as it were, of the security forces. Now, he had this affair, and it was quite wrong of him. He was a married man, so I mean, I'm not judging him on having, a gay affair. I would judge him on saying, you're a married man, you have obligations. If you want to, have a relationship with someone else, at least do the honour of divorcing your wife for it. But, that's not my marriage, and it's up to them. Hey ho. But we have this Melvin who's had this relationship. So there's the possibility, therefore, in an era where being gay was not acceptable, as it were, not socially acceptable, and it was still seen as a disbarrer for certain occupations, but it could also be seen as a focus of blackmail. And when you're in a position where you could theoretically blackmail the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, it is not surprising that the intelligence service will be keeping a very close eye on you. Now, my source says that Melvin is the key here. My source says, keep Melvin in mind. This story is more or less about Melvin, he says. But then my source, who I'm going to have to give some information away, but I'm going to try and do it as little as possible. My source claims he was part of the intelligence service. He was not an intelligence officer. He was not employed directly by MI5 or 6, but he was what's known as an agent. He is an outside source, an outside contractor, a specialist at what he does. And he was told to just monitor. He said he was told to just monitor this situation. There was another, he said, another agent who he said he is prepared to name. I will probably have to name him at some point, because when I give information out regarding this, it will be so easy for people out there in YouTube land to go and Google this. They will find the name of this other agent. But I'm gonna try and resist that as long as I can and try to save him. But I think his name is probably going to come out anyway. But there was this other agent who worked for the he was a specialist as well, who worked for the intelligence services. Now, this other agent was, by dint of his day job, able to go places and get into places and do things that regular intelligence officers just could not do. And that proved very useful for them. And they used to say to him, listen for this, or can you put some hardware there? Things like that. The guy in his day job was an engineer, but he was a very specialist engineer. and so he could go and do things, and that's how they got him in. With various things that were going on, and there was various operations at any time, they tasked this other agent to burgle a house. There was something in there they needed. My source is not telling me what it was or the nature of it, just that it was something. And this other agent was tasked with burgling this house. And he felt very uncomfortable in doing that. Melvin, on the other hand, as this other agent knew, was quite comfortable with a little bit of light burglary. As long as nobody got hurt. Melvin was not in any way a dangerous man. He wasn't one who liked confrontation, but he could be a bit of a sneak thief. He could burgle a property if he could get away with it, that sort of thing. He had a bit of a record, but nothing of personal harm or anything like that. Not that kind of person. So this other agent requested of Melvin to burgle a particular property. So Melvin did, and he obtained some various stuff that was required of him, and he handed them over to the agent. And within a few days, the agent had been arrested and charged with burglary and theft and whatever. This agent, of course, hadn't done the burglary, and he said he wanted his innocence. He could prove his innocence. But they got him up in front of the court. Now, he had no record. This other agent, I'm probably going to have to name him. This other agent had no record. He had never committed a crime. He had a clean record. The value of the property stolen was about £200 to £250, something like that. So it was only a small amount of money, and it was his first offence. And normally in such a case, you would get either a very short sentence, 30 days, 60 days, or if it was, possibly even suspended, you might get we'll give you 3 months suspended. The agent in question got a year in prison for £250 burglary of value and on a clean record. It was a surprisingly heavy punishment for such a small crime. And this other agent suspected that he'd been, quote, fitted up. He's done something, he's annoyed someone, or he's known someone. There's something going on. And they wanted him out of the way for a long period of time while they... How can I put this? Well, they cleaned up their own mess, should we say. And if he was away in prison for whatever, he couldn't deal with it. They could clean it up, move on, and it was done. He did a year in prison and he came out. But he was not going to let that sit. He was angry about this. Now, he was convinced to go and start a new life in Australia. And here's where it's easily findable now, I suppose. So this agent went off and started a new life in Australia. But let's just stop and think about that. There is no way someone who's just done a year in prison for burglary is going to be allowed to just go and start a new life in Australia. It's not the 1800s. They don't let you in without without a clean record. You can't go there as a criminal. Like I say, in the 1800s, it was more or less obligatory. Them days is gone. So this agent, if he did, and he did go to Australia. I've seen that. He's living there today. I've seen the thing. He is living in Australia to this day. So the fact that he's got to Australia means that this can only have been through government level channels. That is somebody in the Foreign Office has pulled strings with the Australian High Commission to allow a convicted criminal to go and live and start a new life in Australia. This will be the security service cleaning up its act a little bit further, giving this guy, look, don't push the boat, don't rock the boat. You want to go to Australia, we'll help, we'll make that happen, bang. And they've done that. So this is there. But even when he was in Australia, this guy this agent, still didn't really like the fact that he would being falsely convicted for a crime he didn't do. So he started pushing and pushing and pushing. In fact, he pushed so hard, he got the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia to write a letter to the British government requesting an independent inquiry into what went on. And this was denied. And he said, but there's a man that he knows can prove that I didn't do it because he did do it. And that man, of course, was Melvin Hodgson. Now, the agent who was requesting this, fighting for his freedom, fighting for his innocence, as it were, even though he's done the time, he still wants to show that he was innocent, kept pushing and pushing and pushing. By this time, Melvin Hodgson had been convicted of other crimes and was currently doing time in Armley Prison. And then all of a sudden, a man, a career criminal, a man who's never done a serious crime in his life, all his crimes were sneak thievery and whatever, nothing against people. He was never going to do long time, jail. He was never going to do life in prison or anything like that. Decides that all of a sudden, jail isn't for him, and he decides to end it all, apparently. And in 1991, in his jail cell, he somehow managed to, himself, and it was recorded. And that is what happened to dear young Melvin Hodgson, a man who was known to the security service because he was a potential blackmail threat to the Home Secretary, a man who committed a crime on behalf of an agent who was asked to do this by the same security service. The agent himself was then imprisoned for over a year and then basically quietly got rid of to Australia. And then the one guy who could exonerate him, strangely ends it all in a prison for what people generally say is no reason whatsoever. So that is the background to our friend Melvin Hodgson. And that brings the end of chapter 1, because now we have to look at what happened after Melvin's sad demise. So we'll move on to the next chapter. Now that is all very good and convenient and lovely little tale to set up, any kind of narrative. But of course, I couldn't take my my source's word. He was very convincing. For example, you may be wondering, why do I assume that he is working for the special forces, working for the security forces? Well, of course, when someone says that, you naturally sort of go, oh, yeah, right. But he was working there certainly in the 80s. And I was in the military in the 80s. So I just asked him a few questions, some of them a little bit probing questions, just to see if what he was saying kind of matched what my memory of what was going on at the time was. And to be fair, he was right. He answered all my questions in a manner that, whilst he could still be lying, but if he is, he's a damn good liar. And he certainly knows enough to convince someone who was actually in the forces that he's plausible. Like I say, I cannot guarantee. So, this is the one thing you must remember all the way through this. Now, the previous chapter 1, I'm on safe ground in terms of everything I've said, because personally I'm on about here, because you cannot libel the dead. So anything I say that may have offended someone who is no longer with us, I can't be sued for it. But we're now moving into the realm of people who are still alive. And so therefore, I must take great care. And I must also endeavour to do some kind of research to try and get second sourcing or some kind of verification for what's said. You see, if somebody comes up with a rumour, now just a little bit of brief law, someone comes up with a rumour that is completely wrong, and is defamatory, for example, they can be sued for defamation. If I report that rumour, I'm not making the rumour up. I'm not the one saying that the rumour is true. I'm not the one claiming that this there. If I'm simply to say it is rumoured that, I too could also be liable for that defamation. However, there is protection in law for reporting it. And one of the protections is that you have done best effort research to substantiate the rumour. And one of the basic ones is if you hear from a second source, and so therefore you're not reliant upon one source, even if it is a rumour, even if it's not true, you're not claiming it is true. And as long as you report it as rumour, but you've got it from two sources, then you have a protection in law because you're reporting that this thing exists. It's not just one man's word. It is a genuine series of rumours that you're reporting on, the fact that there are a series of rumours, not that the rumour themselves may or may not be true. And it's one of those very careful divides that you have to use with language. And so that's where I am. So where I'm trying to do anything is once I've been told that particular part of the tale, I've been told more. But once I've told that particular part of the tale, I've moved away from a place where I'm safe to tell what I've told into more dangerous territory for me, liability-wise. So I decided that I'm going to have to do some independent research to make sure that, these things actually happened. And if I can show that it is substantively correct and that an awful large part of it is substantively correct, then any of the rumour part, which I can then report on the rumour, showing that the rumour is based on factual evidence, and I have got undeniable proof of that evidence that the framework on which the rumour hangs is correct, that offers me another protection in law. And that's what I've done. I've had to go and do some genuine first-hand research to ensure that this Melvin Hodgson, first of all, even existed. Second, that he passed away in prison. Things like that. And so I've done that. And so I'm going to cut down now, and we're going to go and have a look at the deaths in prison custody between 1978 and 2014 for England and Wales. And there's a remarkable amount of them. But we'll have a look at these now. So I'm going to flick this up on the screen. I normally put myself in the corner. I'm just going to put this up on the screen and we'll take a look at it. Here you go. Right, so I've been onto a government website and I've managed to find the deaths in prison custody. And this was reportedly, this is reported over that period between 1978 and 2014. It was published in 2015, so this is old data now. This is now 6 years old, so you can add a lot more to this list than there are here, of course, in the last 6 years. Two things that strike out. Number one is how many men have died. It's predominantly men, and look at the ages. I mean, looking at this list, I'm going to have to probably do a completely separate analysis of this for another video, not even connected to this video, but just it's a huge amount. And just looking at the ages, there's 15-year-olds, there's 19-year-olds, 17-year-olds. Sure, there's 72-year-olds. That's not surprising, but so many teenagers. It's horrific, and virtually all men. I mean, obviously a couple of women there, but virtually all men. But anyway, this is the list. And of course it's just England and Wales. Scotland's got its own one, and Northern Ireland's got its own one. But yeah, so I've gone here. So we know he died in 1991. So I've flicked down. I've already been down it because I've already used the highlighter tool on here to highlight it. But there's just loads and loads and loads of these people all over the country. Death upon death upon death. So we eventually get all the way down through the 80s. Late 80s, 88, 89s. Where's the 89? There we go, 89. So we're going into the 90s now, and we want 91, and it's on the next page, I think. Or is it the page after? Page after? Oh, yeah, page after. Here we go. And there he is. So I've highlighted this one. And there it is, registered on the government site. Melvin Hodgson, male, 30, 28th of December, 1991. So he'll be nearly 31 years ago. So he'll now be gone longer than he lived. And that's the sad tale of Melvin and there. Now it says, if I highlight here, you can read it. Over on the right-hand side, self-inflicted. Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So that's Melvin's passing recorded. So the government now know that he definitely went to prison and he died in prison. That is now indisputable fact. So that's good. That's good. I mean, it's not good for Melvin. It's terrible for Melvin. But it's good for the story because it does show at least that Melvin existed and that he did die in prison, as my source claimed. But then we have to ask another question. And I'm going to look. I'm not going to ask the question, though. I'm going to get an MP to ask the question. So I've done another check here, and I've looked at this. And this comes from 1992. This is about 4 weeks after Melvin's death. And it was in the Commons. This is from Hansard. Now, Hansard, for those who don't know, is the official record keeper of the Houses of Parliament. So when there's a debate or a committee meeting or anything like that, you have the clerks in there. They record everything that's said and it's written up and it goes in on a record. It's like the minutes of a meeting and everything that's asked and answered goes in to Hansard so that it can be quoted years later and nobody can say something and then years later say, I never said that, because then they can just pull out Hansard and say, yes, you can. So Mr. Cryer is to ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department, i.e., the Home Secretary, if he will order an inquiry into Armley Prison following a further self-ending, and if he will make a statement. Ms. Rumbold, it'll be Angela Rumbold, won't it? She would have been, I think, she'd have been, leader of the House. I think she was leader of the House at the time. It's going back. I mean, we're going back 30 years here. I can't remember who it was. I think Angela Rumbold was leader of the House at the time, so she'd have been sort of dealing with the business of Parliament, which is why she's answering this. And she said, "I assume that the honourable member is referring to the death of Mr. Melvin Hodgson at Leeds Prison on the 28th of December last year. I shall decide what form of inquiry into the circumstances may be appropriate once the inquest into Mr. Hodgson's death has been concluded." And that's quite right, and I'll come up. So Angela Rumbold was quite right. After a death in custody, there's always, without exception, an inquiry. Every time. Every single time. Except this time. There was no inquiry. Isn't that weird? A man known to the security forces, seen as a potential threat to the security forces, a man who had, shall we say, enjoyed the company of former Home Secretaries, a man who had committed crimes on behalf of the security services, a man with no reason to do so, and yet who ended himself in a low category prison. And there was no inquiry. Now, if that doesn't seem suspicious, then I've got a bridge to sell you. So why? Why is that? Well, there was no official, should we say, there was no official inquiry. Doesn't mean there wasn't an inquiry, but nothing was published. And how do we know nothing was published? Well, apart from the fact that you can't find anything online, there is another person who was interested in this and believes it's a cover-up. And he requested some information under the Freedom of Information Act. And it gets a little bit wider. So we're going to take a look at a bit of a widening circle. That'll be chapter 3. So let's hold on to our hats and move into chapter 3. There has been other people interested in the death of Melvin Hodgson. People have requested information. and I've discovered this. When I'm doing my research, I was doing original research, obviously checking up on what was told to me by my source, and I've come across things. Now, this particular piece of information I have that I found, it's a freedom of information request. It mentions a few names, and some of those names are actually tied in with the information I was given by my source. So it's all starting to gel together here. Now, you're probably still wondering, what the hell has this got to do with Michael Lockwood? But it will become apparent once we get sort of nearer to the denouement, if you will, of this video. And we're nearly there. But we just got this one more step to do. So we'll go in and we'll have a look at this that's coming up now. And it's a Freedom of Information Act request, and I'm gonna show you the request first by a guy called Phil Collier. He's not my source. I don't know who Phil Collier is. Phil Collier is, I can safely say the name. It's him who's done the name on the Freedom of Information request. It's open. It's anyone can see it if you go looking. So we will go and have a look, and we will see what information the government has on Melvin Hodgson's passing. Here goes. So this is a website called What Do They Know? It's a very useful tool. It's journalists use it all the time. It's a sort of a tracker of freedom of information requests. And this one is for the death of Melvin Hodgson, as you can read. I do recommend, if ever you need to sort of find things out, go to this website. They are absolutely brilliant, and they do have a deep, knowledge, completely searchable, things like that. But anyway, we have the death of Melvin Hodgson. So Phil Collier requested information, and he's asked the Home Office to please send me any correspondence and recorded information on the death of Melvin Hodgson, and including, amongst others, the roles of Miss Anstey, Donald Chapman, Dick Feaster, Keith Halliwell, the now Lord Patton, who was Chris Patton, PJ Nobes and C. Sampson, before and in the cover-up. Yours faithfully, Phil Collier. Now, some of those names may leap out at you. Some may not, but Keith Halliwell, I think he means Helliwell, I think that's a misspelling there, was the Chief Constable of Yorkshire Police. He's investigated the Yorkshire Ripper. I seem to remember he was very controversial Chief Constable. Yeah, he's got a bit of a history. Lord Patton, obviously Chris Patton, he was a Cabinet Secretary. He would undoubtedly have known and discussed the whole matter at the time. PJ Nobes, Nobes was the head of MI5. So he would also undoubtedly have known a lot about what was going on at the time. The others, not so sure about them. They weren't mentioned by my source. Those three I did mention, though. Halliwell, Patton and Nobes. Yeah, they were mentioned by my source, and they would definitely have known what was going on. So it's strange then that the response that comes from the government regarding the death of Melvin Hodgson, because after all, they would undoubtedly have had an inquiry. There would be the results of that inquiry, would there not? Well, let's have a look and see what there is. So, dear Mr. Collier, please see our attached response to your above referenced Freedom of Information request. So this is the government responding. The Home Office is responding. Mr. R. Taylor from the Information Rights Team at the Home Office. So what do you think the response will be? Let's have a look. So here's the response from the Home Office. So, dear Mr. Collier, thank you for your email of the 28th February in which you requested the information under the Freedom of Information Act 2000, and your requested reads as follows. And we've just covered that question, so I'm not going to go over that again. I can confirm that the electronic searches of our database have been conducted. However, no information relevant to your request has been found. The Home Office does not hold any information in the scope of your request. And it says if you're not satisfied with that, you can ring this number, blah, blah, blah. So the Home Office is denying it has any relevant information. And that is to say, no information on the death of Melvin Hodgson. That's the Home Office that's responsible for prisons in this country. And it has no information on the death of a prisoner in its custody. It's covering it up. It's hiding it. Why is it hiding it? Well, let's move on again. Let's end that there and I'll come back up. So, we have a bit of a dichotomy. On one hand, we have evidence from the government's own figures, the Home Office, showing the death in custody of Melvin Hodgson. We also have the Hansard record showing questions were asked in the house of Melvin's death. And yet, when questioned, and under the Freedom of Information Act, all of a sudden, there's no record of it, there's no evidence of it, there's nothing that can be supplied. That is a cover-up. That is a conspiracy to deny the truth. Something is being hidden. And we'll look at what that could possibly be in the next part. And we'll reach a final conclusion for this bunch of evidence. This is just the first, I hope, of many. But as you see now, already it's starting to look like there is an absolute cover-up and that there's no evidence. So what's going on? We know he existed, we know he died, and yet the Home Office are saying we have no record of this. Something stinks. Let's go to the last chapter. In the last chapter, some names were mentioned. I think I said Lord Patton became, or Lord Patton was Chris Patton. There is a Chris Patton who became Lord Patton, but this is Lord John Patton. Different, not related, same name. But they were there. Now, my source mentioned some of these names, and he said they need to be looked at. So I've gone and I've looked at them, and they are all fairly dodgy. But what he said, and now I've got to be very, very careful. So I'm going to place this in there that a certain lord, who shall remain nameless, was involved with the death of Melvin Hodgson in Armley Prison. And he covered up his involvement in that death by making Dame Angela Rumbold a dame. This is what my source claims. Whether this is true or not is another matter, of course. But I'm saying things like this allegedly, a lot because I need to protect myself. But apparently, she said there'd be, as we know, she said there'd be an inquiry. There was no inquiry. There's no evidence of inquiry from a Freedom of Information request. And then very shortly after that, she was made a dame. It seems very convenient on timing. I'm not saying the two are related, of course, under any circumstances. No. I'm sure she's worked very hard and was rewarded for her efforts. But it just seems timing. And then there was this Colin Sampson. Now, he also seems to be somewhere, allegedly, involved with Melvin. And again, allegedly, in order to gain Chief Constable, he faked 13 very serious crimes, the M crimes, and faked them to get them onto the system to make it look like he'd sorted all these out, boosted his points, as it were, and he got made a Chief Constable. And then Her Majesty's Inspector, as of the time it was known, and advising Lord, that certain nameless Lord. Then there was the chap Keith Helliwell, like I mentioned him before, ex-Chief Constable of West Yorkshire. He was also Tony Blair's substance czar. So he, it looks also, may allegedly be involved in the death of Melvin Hodgson. His mother, it is claimed, Ada, was a street worker. You know what I mean? And his son Charlie is an S offender who's got 10 criminal charges. His granddaughter Gabby, she also works on the streets and she deals substances as well. It is claimed by some, including my source, but not necessarily true. We have to hasten because we have no evidence of it. But, these things happen. That Helliwell allegedly placed 92 fake confessions of R and fake confessions of M onto the police national computer. And Melvin was given a fake R confession, And this was covered up, allegedly, by Dame Angela Rumbold. And then there was PJ Nobes. That's his Peter John Nobes. He also, he's got to be, I would imagine, a very complicated way of speaking here, but you understand I've got to cover. So it is allegedly understandable, if it were the case, and we're not saying it is, that he was involved in the death of Melvin Hodgson. He, too, was an ex-Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police, but he got promoted up to become the director of MI5, and he allegedly helped Lord Patton to allegedly cover up Melvin's death in Armley Prison. And rumour has it as well, and it is just rumour, there is no evidence to it, so please, big pinch of salt, that he helped cover up 13 Ripper attacks. And he also helped Helliwell with those 92 confessions, allegedly. Whether he did or not, I don't know. Am I covered? I think I'm covered. I think I've got that out and I'm covered. I've made no direct accusations. But the Lord Chief Justice of England at the time, Lord Lane, and the Master of the Rolls, Lord Denning, they were appalled when MI5 raided their files and they took out proof of wrongdoing, allegedly, of those men, Patton, Sampson, Helliwell and Nobes, so that there'd be no way of ever proving what was done, what was said, who did what, anything like that. My source is adamant that Lockwood knew all that went on. He was in charge of the police complaints people. He knew all that was going on. He kept refusing to open up an inquiry into it. He kept refusing to open inquiries into these people, into the death of Melvin Hodgson, into so many things. He kept refusing to do it. So he too is guilty in the cover-up of what is undoubtedly a state-sanctioned death in prison. We're living in a police state, and they're removing records left, right and centre. And now they're coming for him. They want him silenced. They don't want him to be able to confirm or deny anything that's going on. And I think that he might be in a lot of trouble. He'll have two outs. He'll be able to resign that he's done. He'll go away. He'll keep quiet. He'll never say anything ever again. And this investigation into his past will quietly be dropped, and nothing will ever come of it. Or he may get vociferous, in which case it's already lined up. They're going to push the case he's got. This is a 40-odd-year-old case that would have involved him as a 20-year-old or man in his 20s, having statutory R with a 14-year-old girl. That's the claim. That's the allegation at the moment. Whether it's true or not is another matter for another day. He's innocent until proven guilty, so technically he's still innocent. Well, not technically, he's still innocent. But again, my source says, don't even go there. He says, according to my source, the numbers are much higher, as in not the age of the girl, but the number of people, allegedly. So it's a whole festering stink of corruption, of state-sanctioned crimes. It's bigger than this. This is only, what I'm presenting today is only the parts that I've actually managed to go through and do some checking up on, and where I feel comfortable in telling you. I've been given more, especially about the children, and I'm very, very loath to do anything about that at the moment. I need to really double and triple check that, but my source is adamant, and he says he will provide more information shortly. So keep watching this space. I'm going to stop now, but it does look, in summary, that this guy is being shifted out because of his constant refusals to open up inquiries. He's aiding the state, but for some reason the state has taken a dislike to him, and they feel he's a threat, and so they're having to get rid of him. Maybe he said something that, if he don't do something, he'll open up an inquiry, something like that. But he is undoubtedly at the moment, probably, maybe, allegedly guilty, maybe, of covering up the death of Melvin Hodgson. And for no other reason than, who knows? Who knows what his reasoning is? But it is a whole stinking cavalcade. And the sooner it comes out, the better. But as I get more, I will release more. But thank you for listening. This has been a very long video, and you've done very well if you've got to the end of it. So I shall round off here and just simply say, please hit subscribe to get the next instalment. Do not miss it. Thank you.